I need to check the list of used names before writing. The used names are Derek, Diane, Marcus, Callie, Renata, Gloria, Francesca, Nora, Petra, Mr. Holt, Pop, Waverly, Vivienne, Mr. Calloway, Patricia, Theo, Lily, Jenna, Mom, Dad, Claire, Owen, Adele, Sandra, Lena, Kevin, Ms. Datra, Lena, Kevin, Ms. Datra, Nina, Kevin, Ms. Farrow, Lauren, Eli, Ivy, Bridget, Hazel, Serena, Mitchell, Tessa, Frank, Ryan, Cecile, Naomi, Teddy, Robert, Ren, Rose, Ms. Vance, August. New names I'll use: Marala, narrator, dad, mom, by relationship, brother, equals, my brother, his girlfriend, equals, unnamed or by relationship, brother equals, my brother, his girlfriend, equals, unnamed or by relationship, supporting Colton, brother, Vera, his girlfriend. Wait, Vera? Colton not in the list? Good, I was 26 when I first noticed the dynamic had a name. Before that, I just thought it was family. I thought this was what family looked like, one person quietly holding everything together while everyone else moved through the world unbothered, assuming the scaffolding would hold. I didn't think of myself as being used. I thought I was being a good daughter. That's the story I told myself for years, and I told it so convincingly that I almost believed it all the way to the end. Let me back up. My parents bought their condo in 2019. It's a 2-bedroom in a decent part of town. Not fancy, but not cheap either. My dad had been between jobs for most of that year, and my mom worked part-time at a dental office, which sounds more stable than it actually was. When the lease came up for renewal, they were about $400 short every month. My brother Colton was 23 and living at home, contributing nothing except empty pizza boxes and a rotating cast of girlfriends my mother adored on site. I was the one with a job, a real one. I've been working as a project coordinator for a mid-size event management firm since I was 22, and by 26 I was handling vendor contracts, corporate client timelines, and logistics for events that ran anywhere from 50 people to 500. I wasn't rich, but I was consistent. I had a savings account with actual money in it, a credit score I'd built carefully since college, and a habit of paying my bills on the first of every month without being asked. So when my dad called me that October and explained the situation, I said yes. Of course I said yes. I set up a recurring transfer, $420 a month toward their rent. My dad said it was temporary. My mom said she'd pay me back as soon as her hours picked up. Colton didn't say anything because nobody told him to. That was 3 years before the dinner. In those 3 years, a lot of things happened that I filed under temporary or just this once. Or they really need me right now. I covered my dad's car insurance when his lapsed. I paid off the balance on my mom's Kohl's card when she got hit with interest, $712. I lent Colton $2,000 when he said he had a business idea, which turned out to be a Shopify store selling phone cases that he abandoned after 6 weeks. He never brought up the $2,000 again. And I didn't push because I'd already learned that pushing Colton about money made me the difficult one. Every year at Thanksgiving, my mom would make a small speech about how grateful they were to have a daughter like me. My dad would squeeze my shoulder. I would smile and feel for a few hours like the sacrifice was worth something, like I was seen. That's the thing nobody tells you about approval seeking. It works just enough to keep you going. You get these little doses, the speech at Thanksgiving, the I don't know what we'd do without you, the proud way my mom introduced me to her coworkers, and those doses convince you that the system is fair, that love is being exchanged in both directions, that someday the balance will settle. You keep waiting for someday. Someday doesn't come on its own. I know that now. My parents' 30th wedding anniversary was in March. My mom had been talking about it since the previous summer, how they'd never had a real anniversary dinner, how they'd always meant to do something special, and life had always gotten in the way. My dad started dropping hints about this Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a pre-asphyxie menu and a maître d' who takes your coat. The kind of place where dinner for 4 runs $250 before tip. I knew before anyone said it that I would be paying. That was the thing. Nobody had to ask. The system had been running long enough that it just assumed. My parents would mention something and the expectation would land on me like gravity, like weather. Of course Mara would handle it. Mara always handles it. I made the reservation in January, table for 7:30 p.m., third Saturday in March. I called ahead to arrange a small dessert plate for their anniversary. I found a card at the bookstore that said something about 30 years and still choosing each other every day, and I thought it was beautiful, and I bought it, and I wrote 3 paragraphs inside it in my best handwriting. I also withdrew $5,000 from my savings. This part I need to explain. My parents had been talking for 2 years about replacing the water heater in the condo. It was old, making noises, and my dad kept saying, "One more winter. It'll hold one more winter." I'd been setting aside money for it since the previous spring, a little each month, the way I did everything. The plan was to give it to them at the anniversary dinner as a gift, something practical, something that would actually help them. The card, the dinner, the $5,000 for the water heater. I'd planned all of it. I told my mom about the savings gift 2 weeks before the dinner. She cried. She actually cried. She told me I was the most thoughtful person she'd ever known. That was on a Tuesday. I held on to that feeling for the rest of the week. The Saturday of the dinner, I dressed up. I wore a black blazer over a silk blouse, heels I'd bought specifically for this, the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. I looked, if I'm being honest, better than I'd looked in a long time. I drove to the restaurant feeling something close to happy. I arrived at 7,020. My parents and Colton were already there, standing near the host's stand. Colton had brought his girlfriend Vera, which was news to me because the reservation was for 4, and now we were 5. Vera was wearing a sequin top and holding a tiny purse and had clearly been told very little about the evening because she seemed surprised when I walked in, like she hadn't expected me to actually show up. The host informed me apologetically that they could not accommodate a 5th person at our reserved table. "Oh, it's fine," my mom said in the tone of voice she used when she had already decided it was fine before consulting me. "Mara won't mind." I stood there. My dad turned to me with the expression he'd been perfecting for 30 years, the one that asked me to be reasonable, to not make this a thing, to be the bigger person in this particular moment the way I had been in every other moment. "There's a little two-top right by the window," he said. "You'd practically be with us. Or," Colton said, pulling out a chair for Vera, "she could just grab a seat at the bar until a spot opens up." I looked at the bar. It was Friday. Well, Saturday. And it was full. I looked at the table where my family was settling in. The table I had reserved for the dinner I was paying for. With the card in my bag and the $5,000 in an envelope also in my bag, which I had driven near my car wearing my grandmother's earrings to give to my parents for their anniversary. "It's just a seat issue," my dad said. "It's not a big deal, sweetheart." I didn't say anything right away. I took a breath. I felt something in my chest do a slow, quiet shift, like tumblers in a lock turning over one by one until something that had been closed for a long time clicked open. "Sure," I said. "Give me just a minute." I stepped away from the table toward the small hallway near the restrooms. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I'd expected to feel more upset. Instead, I felt clear, calm in a way that felt different from the calm I usually performed. Not the calm of making peace with something unfair, but the calm of someone who has simply finished making a decision. I opened my bag. I took out the envelope with the $5,000. I put it back in my wallet. Then I took out my phone. I had received 3 days earlier an email from my parents' property management company. It was a standard notice. Their lease was coming up for renewal at the end of April, and they needed to confirm whether they'd be renewing. The email had been forwarded to me because I was listed as an emergency contact and also, frankly, because I was the one who'd filled out half the original application. I opened the email. I hit reply. I typed calmly that the tenants of that address would not be renewing their lease and that they should consider this notice of non-renewal as of the end of April. I asked them to send the official paperwork to my parents' email address. I thanked them for their time. I hit send. Then I went back to the table. I sat down at the little two-top by the window that my dad had pointed out. It was actually a nice spot, a candle, a view of the street, a waiter who appeared within 2 minutes and took my drink order without any fuss. I could see my family from where I sat. My mom was laughing at something Vera had said. My brother was showing my dad something on his phone. They looked comfortable. They looked like a family at dinner. The waiter brought my wine. I ordered the branzino and a side of roasted vegetables, and when the bread basket came, I took 2 pieces and ate them slowly and watched the street outside and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly where I meant to be. About 40 minutes into the meal, my dad came over to check on me. He seemed pleased with himself for doing this. "You doing okay over here?" he said, with the slightly guilty cheer of someone who has decided the guilt is manageable. "I'm great," I said. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you." I set down my fork. I reached into my bag and took out the folded printout. I'd printed the non-renewal email before I left the house, in a moment of premonition I couldn't explain at the time. I held it out to him. He took it. He read it. His expression went through several phases. "What is this?" he said, not a question. The voice of a man who knows exactly what it is. "It's just a piece of paper," I said. "It's not a big deal." He stared at me. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the branzino, which was genuinely excellent. "Mara." His voice had dropped. "This says you told them we're not renewing." "You're not," I said. "Not with my $420 a month helping to make it possible. That stops at the end of this month. You can't just, we have nowhere to go." "You have 8 weeks," I said. "That's more notice than most people get. Why would you do this here tonight?" I looked at him. I looked at him for a long moment. And I thought about the Kohl's card and the car insurance and the $2,000 Colton, never mentioned again, and the Thanksgiving speeches, and every time I had made myself smaller or quieter or more reasonable so that someone else could be comfortable. "Because," I said, "tonight felt like the right time to stop waiting for a seat at the table." He went back to the table. I watched him lean down and say something to my mom. I watched her face change. I watched Colton look over at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not quite guilt, not quite shock. Something in between. Vera looked confused. I gave them a small wave and turned back to my window. I finished my dinner. I paid my bill, just my bill, $38 plus tip. I folded my napkin on the table, put on my coat, and walked out of the restaurant into the cool March night. My phone started ringing before I reached my car. I let it ring. Here's what I want you to understand, because I've had a lot of time to think about this, and I've talked about it with my therapist and with friends who know me well, and I've arrived at something that feels true. I wasn't a saint in this story. I participated in the dynamic for years. I kept saying yes when I should have said, "Let me think about it." I kept transferring money and absorbing debt and making myself available because somewhere in me I had decided that this was how I earned my place in my own family. That love was something I had to fund. That is not a character flaw. It's a wound. It's what happens when you grow up in a house where stability depends on you being useful, where the warmest moments are the ones right after you've solved a problem, where you learn early that you are most loved when you are most needed. You don't end up like that because you're weak. You end up like that because you learned. The thing about learned behavior is that it can be unlearned. I called my parents the next day. I told them I loved them. I told them I would help them find a new place within their actual budget, and I would help them move, and I would continue to be their daughter. I just wouldn't be their bank account anymore. I told them I was also canceling the automatic transfer as of April 1st. My mom cried. My dad said I was overreacting. Colton texted me a long message that started with, "I can't believe you would do this to them," which told me everything I needed to know about whether he planned to step up. They found a smaller apartment. They found one in 6 weeks, which is faster than the timeline they claimed was impossible. It's 20 minutes farther from downtown, which my mom has mentioned every time we've spoken since, but they found it and they're in it, and the rent fits what they actually make without my contribution. Colton did not offer to help with the moving costs. I paid for a moving truck because that felt right, and also because some habits take longer to break than others. But I didn't pay for the deposit. I didn't top up the difference. I didn't absorb the shortfall. The water heater money is still in my savings account. I've been thinking about what to do with it. My therapist suggested I use it on something just for me. A trip. Something I've been putting off. I have a list. I've been putting it off for years. This spring, I'm going to Portugal. I've never been anywhere just because I wanted to go. I'm going to a small town on the coast that I read about in a travel magazine 2 years ago and bookmarked and never mentioned to anyone, because by the time I got home from reading it, someone in my family needed something and I moved on. I'm not moving on this time. I booked the flights last week. I fly out in May. And for the first time in longer than I can clearly remember, when I picture myself sitting at a table by the water, in the sun, in a town where nobody needs anything from me, there's only one person there, me, with the seat I chose for myself. I've thought a lot about what made that night possible. Not the decision itself, canceling a lease renewal takes about 40 seconds on a phone, but the years of smaller decisions that had to happen first. Every time I transferred the $420 without being asked. Every time I absorbed a shortfall and called it love. Every time I sat in the car afterward and felt the particular loneliness of someone who is surrounded by family and still completely alone in what she carries. What I know now is that actions accumulate, not in a mystical way, just in the plain, observable way that causes have effects and patterns have consequences. I spent 3 years building a system where my generosity had no floor, and so naturally, the people inside that system never needed to find one. My dad never asked Colton to contribute because I was already there. My mom never pushed back on the spending because the gap always got filled. I had created, with the best intentions and a genuine desire to be loved, a situation in which my absence was the only thing that could force change. That's the part I had to sit with. Not the anger at them. That was easy and also temporary. But the honest accounting of my own role. I had been telling myself a story about sacrifice and loyalty, and the story was true as far as it went. But it left out the part where I kept saying yes because no felt too dangerous. No felt like it might cost me the Thanksgiving speeches. No felt like it might confirm something I'd always been afraid of, that without my usefulness, I wasn't quite worth keeping around. That is not wisdom, that is fear wearing the costume of love. And one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was look at that fear directly and decide it wasn't a good enough reason anymore. The intelligence I'm most proud of from that night wasn't the non-renewal email. It was the recognition, finally, that I had been solving the wrong problem for 3 years. I kept trying to fix the gap between what my family needed and what they had. The actual problem was that I had never asked whether that gap was mine to fix. I had assumed the answer. I had never questioned the assumption. Moral clarity doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet shift at a restaurant table while you're watching your family settle into seats you reserved and paid for. Something simply becomes true, that you are allowed to stop, that love does not require you to fund it, that a family capable of letting one person carry everything is also capable of learning to carry their own weight if given no alternative. Colton texted me, "I can't believe you would do this to them. He has not offered to cover a single bill since." That sentence tells me more about what he believed was fair than anything he could have said directly. My parents are fine. They are in a smaller apartment, and my mom mentions the commute every time we talk, and my dad is slower to call me now, which I think is embarrassment more than anger. We are finding, carefully, a different shape for our relationship. One where I show up as a daughter and not as infrastructure. I leave for Portugal in 6 weeks. The money I saved for their water heater, which, it turned out, they replaced themselves in January without mentioning it to me, is paying for flights and 10 days on the coast. I have never taken a trip just because I wanted to. I have never booked something without first checking whether anyone needed anything. Nobody needs anything. Or if they do, it isn't mine to provide. I used to think that was a sad sentence. Now it just sounds like the truth.